Apologies ahead of time as usual for my terrible pronunciation. Before we start this video, a large thank you to Andrew, Jesse, Agile, a name I cannot pronounce, thank you for the support, my man, AJ, Heavenly Dog, Saj, Serial, and Loic for their support on Patreon. I sincerely hope you guys enjoy the video. And a special thank you to Mike Harden Games for their immense support of this channel on Patreon. Hello guys, and today's goal of the video is to make the zombie pursue our character and chase them. But first, as you can see here, this line is a little bit over the head of the character, and the zombie, it's meant to be at the eye level because this is to determine where we are looking from, or the zombie is looking from to see us. So first I'm going to make a variable to fix that. Right here I'm just going to copy and cut out this little chunk of code and paste it up here. I'm going to rename it though. I'm going to give it its own header too, and we'll call that, let's call that detection eye level. And I'll make a comment here so we know exactly what that is. And I'm going to rename this variable from character height to character eye level. And I'm going to make a serializable field aspect next to it. I'm going to change it to 1.8f. Might have to change that again in game. We'll go see it. I'm also just going to erase this comment and put another comment up here. Paste it again. I'm going to say this setting determines where our line cast starts on the y-axis of the character. So just basically it's where the eyeballs should be on the character because that's where the line cast is starting from. I'm just going to put brackets here. Used for line of sight. Now we'll save that and minimize this. And we'll go back into the game here. Now you can see it's a bit lower. Still need to tweak that a little bit. So I'm just going to mess with the settings here. And we'll put it down a little bit. You have to be careful because depending on which angle you look at, it could be deceiving where it appears to be coming from. That looks about eye level. I'm just going to go out here now in the corner. Now it kind of looks like it's in my neck. Yeah, so I think 1.6 is going to be the best setting for that. Let's just leave it like that. That looks really good. Okay, that's fine. So now that's out of the way. You have a tweakable setting because if your zombie is different height, obviously this setting is going to be a little bit different. So let's go into the pursue target state script. But before we actually start adding code, let's actually create an empty game object under our zombie. I'm just going to call this zombie Nav Mesh or zombie Nav Mesh Agent. We're going to place the Nav Mesh Agent on this. So I'm going to explain what we're doing. Normally you use the Nav Mesh Agent to move your AI. We're using a combination of Nav Mesh Agent and manual rotation. The reason why we're doing this is because when we actually add in attack animations, we want our zombie to basically use a manual rotation where he's just going to rotate towards the character or just rotate with the animation. We only want the zombie to be using the Nav Mesh Agent when we're actually in the pursue target state, so he has pathfinding. That might be a little bit confusing to some people, but we're going to be using a combination of both. If you don't have it, go to Window and AI and add Navigation tab. Make sure you set all of your environment to static, as I just did in the video, and then hit Bake. You'll get this little blue area around, and this will basically allow our Nav Mesh Agent to be used. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be using the Nav Mesh Agent sometimes, but not all the time. So we're going to have to do a couple things to tweak it, because it's not going to be used as you would normally use it. So let's actually add the variable for Nav Mesh Agent. And to do that, we have to say using unityengine.ai, and this is on the zombie manager script. And then we're going to add a variable of type Nav Mesh Agent. Just going to call that zombie Nav Mesh or zombie Nav Mesh Agent. So basically the principle is the Nav Mesh Agent is going to get our destination. We're always going to keep the Nav Mesh Agent, I'm just going to call this an awake, at the same transform as our zombie, but we're going to actually change the transform of our zombie's rotation to our Nav Mesh's rotation. So our Nav Mesh will always rotate to find proper pathfinding when we actually set a destination, and we can copy the rotation of our Nav Mesh to our zombie's rotation, but still move using our animator values, which will move our character with root motion. So let's make a private void on this pursue target state. Let's call this move towards current target. As I just said, we're using animations to move, so I'll show you how we're going to do that. I'll just put some pseudocode here. We're going to say enable movement via animation blend tree. And in the previous video, we set up animations on our zombie, and we made it so if we change a variable on the animator called vertical, or a parameter rather, we'll actually make our zombie move. And as you can see here, if I go in here now and change this vertical to 1, that makes us walk. I actually have to change out these animations because they're broken. They actually don't work as they were intended to work. So the animations you see my zombie perform in a second will be different than those. But it still works the same way. We're changing that parameter, vertical, from 0 to 1. 0 is idle and 1 is move. So let's make an animator variable here on the zombie manager script. Let's just call it animator. I'm going to say animator equals get component animator because the animator sits in the same game object as the script. And let's actually make that public. Let's make the Nav Mesh Agent public too. First, I'm going to make a little header here. I'm just going to say animator. I just want to keep all these things organized because they do display in the inspector when you set them in public. And it's nice to be able to see them all separately when you have to debug and make sure all your variables are called properly and such. So I'm just going to make another header here too and call this Nav Mesh Agent. Now, all we got to do to make our guy move, and make this public, is basically change a 0 to a 1, and that will enable movement. And since the movement has root motion, we'll begin to walk forward. So I'll show you. Move towards current target. All we have to do here is pass the zombie manager on this function, and then we call that zombie manager. We say zombie manager dot animator, calling the animator component that we just activated, and then we say dot set float, and we're going to set the float vertical, which is a parameter on the animator, to 1. We're going to do that over the time of 0.2 seconds, and we're going to do that by time.delta time. All that does is add a smoothing effect, so it's not just basically instantly changing to that number, because that would look very rigid and weird. It blends it in over time, specifically over 0.2 seconds. And now if we actually call this function inside of our state tick function, so just wherever you want to, right below the debug or above the debug log, as long as it's before the return, just say move towards current target and pass the zombie manager. Now, just to show you, if we save this and we go into the game here, you're going to see this guy probably walk through the wall because I don't think he has a collider as soon as he sees us. So out here, he has, achieved line of sight. There you go. We're changing a 0 to 1, so he walks forward. But he walks right to the wall. This is because he has no collider or rigid body like our character does. So an easy fix for that right away. We have to obviously add a capsule collider and a rigid body. This will make it so if he hits another collider, the movement will stop. And let's just add to these components. I'm going to unpack the zombie prefab just so I can move these components to the top because I like having my scripts all in a line and my components like my animator and my rigid body just above all the scripts. This is just preference. You don't need to do this. But what you do need to do is freeze the rotation on the X, Y, and Z axes on your rigid body because we're going to rotate with the script. If not, you'll get some really weird behavior. But everything else, you're good to go. Now I'm going to actually edit the collider sizes so it matches somewhat of the shape of our character. I'm going to make the height about 1.8 should be fine, and the width between 0.3 and 0.5. The Y should be starting on the 1, and then that looks good. As you can see, it looks pretty similar to what we have for our character. So now if I start the game, you will see that we can do the same thing. We will give the zombie line of sight. He will see us, and he will begin to walk forward. Oh, but he does not. Okay, so here's the problem that we have now. We just added a collider. So that line of sight command that we normally use is actually bringing up solid in this collider because this counts as an object to Unity. It doesn't know the difference. So we have to let Unity know that we have to ignore this. We have to ignore the zombie itself. Otherwise, the zombie will bring up in the zombie. We don't want that. We want the zombie to be able to see us. So we have to make it so the zombie can see through its own collider. And this is very simple. I'm just going to change this header title to line of sight detection because we're going to add a line of sight layer here that will allow it to ignore the zombie's layer. So we're going to make a serializable field layer mask, and let's just call this ignore for line of sight detection. And basically, we're going to plug this in here now on our line cast. So if we just put a comma here after the out hit right here on the start point, the zombie start point, player start point, put down ignore for line of sight detection. And now when we go into the game here, what you want to do is go to this variable, or go to the zombie rather, add a new layer, call this zombie. Just make sure you have it set for the zombie, and then change everything in this, and then go to your zombies states right now, and then go down to the layer, hit everything, and then on highlight zombie. So first start off by clicking everything, and then just click zombie, and that will remove it. And basically, it will detect everything you have in this list except for zombie because zombie is not ticked. So it will ignore its own collider or any collider on its own layer. And since the collider is on the layer of zombie, now when we start the game and go out here, we can cut the corner and we can give him line of sight, and he should walk forward and bring up solid in that wall. There he goes, and yes, because he has a collider, he can no longer walk forward past objects. Okay, cool. So that's a little bit done. Now we actually got to rotate this guy. So what we're going to want to do is make a private void rotate towards current target. And likewise with our move towards current target, we're going to pass a zombie manager because we're going to need some data. We're going to need to access our Nav Mesh Agent and a rigid body that we just made. Well, in the future, probably a rigid body. I don't think we have to access that right this second, but our Nav Mesh Agent for sure. So what we want to do is make a header here. Let's call this rigid body, and I'm just going to make a public rigid body. We will be accessing this at some point in the code, and let's just call this zombie rigid body. And let's call it on awake since it sits on the same game object as this script. the zombie manager scripts, we will use get component. And obviously we're looking for rigid body, and we're good to go. Okay, so next, back over here on our rotate towards target state. The first thing we need to do is just go in here and we're going to use some data from the zombie manager. So make sure you have that dragged across, or inserted rather. And we're going to say zombie manager dot zombie nav mesh agent dot enabled is equal to true. We always want to make sure that it is enabled when we enter the state. And we're going to say zombie manager dot zombie nav mesh agent dot set destination. And we're going to make it zombie manager dot current target dot transform dot position. Now, if you're in the pursue target state, you should always have a target, obviously, so we don't need to check for null because you can only get to this state by having a target. Then we're going to say zombie manager dot transform dot rotation equals quaternion dot slurp, and we're going to make that slurp between the current rotation, which is zombie manager dot transform dot current rotation. So we'll just dot transform dot rotation, sorry, and then we're going to make it go over by the zombie manager dot, and then we're going to pass the nav mesh agent, so zombie nav mesh agent dot transform dot rotation. And all this means is over time we're going to turn our zombie to the same direction our nav mesh agent is turning. And we're going to pass that by a variable we have not made yet. We're going to add in zombie manager.rotation speed divided by time.delta time. So basically all this is going to do is our nav mesh agent, once you have a destination set, it's always rotating towards the direction it needs to go to figure out a path to the target. And since we're not moving with our nav mesh agent, we're moving with our animations, we're just going to copy the rotation of our nav mesh agent and then rotate our zombie in the same direction our nav mesh agent is rotating. So let's make a header here back on the zombie manager. Let's call this locomotion. And then we're going to make that variable I just stated. It's going to be called rotation speed. So let's make a public rotation speed. And I'm just going to initialize mine at say 4 or 5. Let's make that a float. Now this is important. I'm going to go over this in the video. Since we are using a nav mesh agent, there's a setting I believe called angular speed. If you're still not rotating very fast, you can actually adjust the angular speed rotation because this speed is going to adjust how fast we copy the nav mesh's rotation speed. If you want to adjust how fast the nav mesh actually rotates, use the angular rotation speed. Now make sure you're calling rotate towards target in your state tick. And now on the zombie manager, let's add an update function. And let's say zombie nav mesh agent dot transform dot local position equals vector 3.0. And all this does is it makes sure that the nav mesh agent is never moving out from under us. It's always staying on the same position as our zombie. We're only rotating it. We're not moving its position. So we copy its rotation, and it always stays under us. Now, if we start the game, or actually, let's go over here first. You can see the nav mesh agent is around the zombie right now, at the state. So now we start the game. Let's press play and watch. It will not move out from under the zombie. It'll stay there, but it will rotate. So now when I give the zombie line of sight, there, you can see the zombie is matching the rotation of the nav mesh agent. Now, there's a problem, obviously. This is good because now he follows us. It's really cool. He's rotating towards us. And this is working just fine. But if we were to stand still, he'll get next to us eventually and he'll just keep walking and walking and walking at us. So what we want to do is set the stage for our next state, which is the attack state. So we want the zombie to get close to us and then switch to the attack state. And we're going to do that by setting two variables. One is going to be called distance from current target, and one is going to be called minimum distance to attack. So basically, when the distance from the current target is equal or less than the minimum distance to attack, we then want to change the state to an attack state. So let's make a new script. So let's just call this attack state, and let's actually start plugging in some logic. We're not going to begin the attack state function today. We're just going to make a very simple debug message letting us know we've gotten there, and we're going to stop our movement when we get in the attack state by setting it to 0. So let's make the attack state derived from state. Let's go back onto the pursue target state. Let's actually make a variable of type attack state here on top, much like we did with the idle state in calling our pursue target state. That's weird. I'm not sure why that's. Maybe it's because I didn't save it. For some reason, I can't call on my attack state. Let's try saving it. Oh, I see what I did. I put in a namespace on accident. I'm so used to the other series, I always enter my namespace there. I did it for this one as well. Okay, so now it should work. Save that. Back over. Yes, attack state. So let's call it attack state. And now let's make some of those variables that we discussed just a second ago. Let's first add an awake here, though, and say attack state is equal to get component attack state because, again, this state will sit on the same game object as the attack state script when we add it. Okay, looks good. this looks fine. I'm going to minimize that. Just check everything over, guys. Now, let's go over to the zombie manager, and let's add those two variables. So, let's make them both a float, and I'm just going to put them in the current target section for the public float distance from current target, because this has information to do with the current target. And we can actually get this on the update function. We have to make sure we checked to see if our current target does not equal null. So if our current target does not equal null, meaning if we do have a target, there's actually a function called vector3. I think it's called .distance. So we're going to say distance from current target equals vector3, not 2, .distance, yes. And we're going to get the distance from our current target .transform .position, and then our transform .position. And that will detect the distance for us and give it back in terms of a float. And then we can make another float. We'll make a header for this because this will be settings for our attack state. So we'll make a header called attack. And let's make a float called minimum distance needed to attack. So in the future, when we get to this distance, we're going to switch to our attack state, stop our movement, and attempt to perform an attack. We'll just set it at 1 for now. We'll play with it in the future to make it better. You can mess around with it and change whatever you want. Now over here in the pursue target state, we need to make an if statement. We're going to say a very simple statement. If zombie manager .distance from current target is less than or equal to zombie manager .minimum attack distance, then we're simply going to return the attack state. And if not, we're going to keep returning this state. Now this is important. Also move these two functions above everything. If you don't have the attack state script added to your zombie, it will not give you an error message, and it won't switch to states. So make sure you do that. So what you want to do is do that right now that you've got the logic done. Just add the attack state to the zombie's states game object. So let's make a public override on the attack state for tick. And all I'm going to do is throw a debug message just saying attack or attacking. And then I'm going to call upon the zombie manager, specifically the animator on that. And I'm going to set the float of vertical to 0 by 0.2 seconds over time.delta time. And all this does is it stops our movement because it changes the vertical parameter from 1 to 0 over the time of 0.2 seconds. And that will smooth out our movement and make us go from a walking state to a stopping state. It is at this point then, if we had an attack set up and we actually got further into the video, we would attack our target. But we'll get into that in the next video. So I'm just going to then say return this because you always have to return something on these states. And we're going to save that. And that should be everything that we need to do. So make sure you add the attack state to the states game object. Right there under the pursue target state script. Hit play. Let's go into the game here now. And now if I cut the corner, he should follow me. And when the distance from the target becomes less than or equal to the minimum attack distance, which is 1, you can see down the bottom right corner that I placed there, he should stop moving. And that will set the stage for our next video. So let's just keep backing up here and wait for him to get close. And there we go. He stops in his tracks. All right, guys, if you did like this video, be sure to drop a like, leave a comment. It does genuinely help my series out so much. And before I go, I have to show you something. So I want to explain one more thing because I told you I'd touch on at the end of the video. Basically, the rotation speed that we've set up, this variable in the pursue target state, this is important because the rotation speed is only going to determine the speed at which we copy the rotation of the Nav Mesh Agent, okay? So the Nav Mesh Agent is always rotating towards its current destination. The rotation speed variable is going to determine how fast we copy that speed. So obviously it can only be as fast as the Nav Mesh Agent itself is turning. If you want to actually increase the speed at which the Nav Mesh Agent itself turns and rotates, there is a variable on the Nav Mesh, which I will pull up now, just one sec. So the variable is actually over here, and it's right here is this angular speed. And this is basically going to determine how fast the Nav Mesh Agent rotates towards the next rotation it needs to get to its destination. So basically, just to go over it one more time to really drill it home, the rotation speed variable on our zombie manager will determine how quickly we copy the rotation of the Nav Mesh Agent, which is how fast we're going to turn. But to determine how fast the Nav Mesh Agent rotates, this is how fast basically the zombie's Nav Mesh will rotate, you must change the angular speed variable. I hope that is clear. If that is unclear, please let me know and I will go over it further in the next episode. So, I hope you guys did enjoy the episode, and I will see you in the next one where we will cover the attack state. And as I was saying, leave a comment to appease the YouTube algorithm gods, and if you're feeling a super champion, check out my Patreon below. I'll see you guys in the next one.